Hello everyone, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to be talking to you about Ajax. So how it's used, I'm going to be using my usual visual style as well as show you how Twitter uses Ajax to update this little button right here with the count without a browser refresh, followed by some of our own code examples to finish things off. Now, the only prerequisite that I ask of you before starting this video is to have a basic understanding of the fundamentals of JavaScript first. Or if you're feeling adventurous and want to learn what Ajax is anyway, then please do carry on. This video is actually part of a Asynchronous JavaScript mini-series that I am doing, which is free and will always be free. So please do give me that like and that sub, as that is how I can carry on to make content for each and every one of you. So please go ahead and do that. And before we get going, a quick word for our video sponsors. Cast AI is a cloud optimization platform that reduces cloud costs, optimizes DevOps, and automates disaster recovery via multi-cloud. What this means is that if you are using Kubernetes or similar, you can slash your cloud cost bills in half, make DevOps up to 10 times more efficient in general, and moreover, get detailed cost reports to enable forecasting expenses at the level of project, cluster, namespace, and deployment, down to individual microservices. Have you got a project that currently uses Kubernetes that you'd like to test out? Analyze your cluster for free by clicking the link in the description below. Go on, have a little peek. Now, what exactly is Ajax and why do we care? Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. To summarize, Ajax is the use of the XML HTTP request object to communicate with servers. It essentially sends and/or receives information in various formats. The formats for sending information include JSON, XML, HTML, or just plain old text files. Now, the XML at the end of Ajax is a bit outdated, as the majority of devs now use JSON. So that's just a little insight for you, as well as just letting you know that we will mostly be seeing JSON in this mini-series. So to recap again, it is the use of something. Ajax is not a programming language, you can't install it to use it, it's essentially nothing tangible. Ajax is considered to be a web development technique. What makes Ajax so powerful is that it's asynchronous by nature. By asynchronous, we mean that it can communicate with the server, exchange data, and update the page without having to refresh the page itself. So, for example, say you had a web page. It has a list of films, each with a little title and image on a card. The web page also has a button here to load more films. When we click the button to load more films, this is what is classed as an event occurring. An XML HTTP request object is then created by JavaScript. Next, the XML HTTP request object sends a request to a web server. Now, the server will next process the request and send a response back to the web page. Once back on the web page, the response is read by JavaScript and the proper action is taken. In this case, the page content will be updated by JavaScript and we will have more films showing on the website. Simples, right? Let's look at this in a real-life example with this super cool one from Web Concepts that I saw a few years back. They used Twitter to demonstrate this and I thought it was really good and I couldn't really think of a better way to explain it myself, so I'm going to use their example, but of course updated for 2021, and I hope I do it justice. Let's have a look at the Twitter homepage. Now, here is our homepage. If I was to wait a bit, you will notice that newer tweets have come in. This number is changing without us refreshing the screen or anything. Notice the page doesn't refresh entirely, just this little number pops up right here. Let's see what is going on under the hood. So I'm going to get my developer tools out and inspect the page and click on the network tab right here. You will see that Twitter is making a new request every 20 seconds or so. So to its servers to get the latest data. The thing we need to look at is the XHR. So the XML HTTP request for short. So what is happening here is that rather than loading the data through the browser HTTP request initiated through the URL bar, Ajax uses JavaScript's XML HTTP request object in order to make HTTP requests behind the scenes. Now, as far as the server is considered, these requests are identical to the normal requests you make if you enter them in the URL bar. Let's move on by having a deeper look into the XHR request Twitter is making. Now, if I click on this one here that says badge count, that is correct because it's the little counter that is being updated, so that makes sense. You will see a URL that looks like it's to Twitter's internal API to get what looks like the JSON for the badge count. Let's have a look if we are right by looking at the response. And great! We will see that we do get some data that gives us the total unread count, which is exactly the same that we have on our page. How cool is that? That is Ajax at work. Great. Now let's get to accessing data for an API using Ajax in our own personal project. So here we have our project. It's just a simple index.html file with some boilerplate code. Okay, so here we have just some simple HTML boilerplate. All I've done is put a button that says show countries on the browser. So if I go ahead and open this up in the browser, it will look like this, but the button doesn't do anything at all for the moment. So what do I want to happen? Let's think of our movies example. So all I want to happen is that something loads on the press of this button. In this case, when I press the button, I want the site to make a request to get all the countries from the countries API here. So this is a RESTful API that I use quite a lot. It's quite cool as it allows us to get all the countries in JSON format with a flag and a lot of other detail too. So if I just go to all, the endpoint all, so I'm just going to copy that and put it in my browser, you should see this. Now I have a JSON formatter called JSON view that will essentially get all that text on all the characters and format it a lot nicer. So that is what you see here. Please have a go at downloading it if you want your JSON to look more like this rather than what it looked like when we looked at the page. So just like that. Okay, so now that we have our endpoint and now that we know what we want to do, let's do it. So we have a button and then I'm going to use on click just like so. And what do I want to happen on click? Well, we want to show the countries. So I'm going to write a function called show countries just like this. I'm just going to minimize this for now. So we've got a function. Let's write our function, show countries. So I could, of course, let's get our script tag up just like so. I could make a new file, so make a index.js file, so a JavaScript file, and then link our script tag to it, but I'm not going to for now. I'm just simply going to write all of my JavaScript in between these two tags. So the first thing that I decided to do is write a function that will allow me to show the countries. So let's do it. I'm going to write function show countries and then open up our curly braces. So in Ajax, everything is handled, as we know, by the XML HTTP request object. So that is something that we mentioned previously. This is what it looks like. So to initialize it, all I would do is write new and then call it like so. And now let's save it so that we can reuse it in our file. I'm going to save it as this. So again, we've seen this before when we inspected the page. I'm just going to call it that. You can of course assign this to any variable name that you wish. So once that is initialized, let's get to actually getting the data. This object actually comes with a bunch of stuff that we can use from it. So if obviously we now know this as XHR. So if I get this, I could use the method of open. So that comes with this object. The open method comes with the XML HTTP request object. The open method is what we're going to use to initialize the request. So in the open method, there are three things we need to pass. The first is what kind of request it is. I know this is going to be a GET request, but it can be a POST request if we are sending data, a DELETE request, and so on. Please do look into the HTTP requests if this is the first time you are coming across this. The second thing that we're going to have to pass through is the path to the data. So in this case, I've already shown you it. I want to get all of this data. So I'm just going to copy this and put it in here as a string. And the third thing we need to pass into the open method is if this is asynchronous or not. I know this is an asynchronous function, so I'm just going to put true. So there we have it. We have now initialized the request. Next, we need to send the request. So there is another method that comes with this object right here, which we now know as XHR, and that is the send method. So just like that. Okay, so we are initializing the request and we are sending the request too. Now, there is another concept that we need to cover, however, and that is handling the response. If you remember from my infographic earlier with the movies, when we send a request, there was a response. We need to handle that response. There is another method for this, so once again, XHR, called onLoad. And all I'm going to do is add a callback function to this. If you haven't covered callbacks, that is something that we are going to be covering in this mini series. For now, just know that I'm just going to write function like so. So I'm literally assigning a function that is not called yet to the XHR onLoad. This callback function is going to deal with our status codes that we receive back. There's actually a cool website for all the status codes. So if you ever get a status code that you don't know what it means, visit http status.org and it will literally show you all the status codes that can possibly come back. So there really are a lot. Okay? For now, I'm not going to do anything if there's an error. I'm only going to cover what happens if the request was successful. So the 200 status code. So let's do that. If XHR status, that is another method that comes with this object, equals 200, well then what do we want to happen? For now, I'm just going to say console log success and save. So now let's go back to what we've built. Just going to inspect the page, get our console log out. So if I now click show countries, we get a success message, which I have misspelt, but at least you know that is mine. Wonderful. Okay, so we've done that. We do have a few more things to do. We need to handle the response. Okay, so we need to handle the response JSON and pass it in order so we can see it in the browser. So all I want to do is from this URL, I'm going to get let's get the name of the country and the flag so we can display it in the browser. So let's go back here. All I'm going to do, so if this is successful, console log success, now we need to get the response from the JSON, okay? So I'm gonna get this response and I'm gonna save it as countries. Great. Now I also need to pass this. So I'm just gonna show you what I mean. If I put countries like so, and then refresh the page, and then just show countries, this is what we will get back. okay, which is fine. However, it's not really workable. So all I need to do is use the Json object. So this is another object, just like this one that comes back with methods. And I'm going to use pass and wrap the response in it. So now I select countries. There you go. That's much more workable. Each country is coming back as an object, just like we saw here. So that's our first object. That's our second object, and so on. Great. So now that we have that, I just want to get the name, as I said. So the name and the flag from this data. So let's carry on. Okay, because I want to work with all the objects that are returned, I'm going to use for each. So I'm going to grab the countries array and use for each. Now for each country in my array, what do I want to do? So I can name this whatever I want. Essentially just means any element in our array. And for each country, well, I want to go and let's actually create a div first. So I'm going to do that all here. Document, create element. I'm going to create a div. Let's save this as the const country card. And once we have a country card, I'm going to use, let's use inner HTML to assign the country name. So all I'm doing is going into the first item, or into every item. For each means every item, and going into the first object and getting the name. Okay, so that's all I am doing. I'm getting the name and then I'm putting it in the inner HTML of a div that we have just created. Okay, so that is it. Now I just need to append it into my browser. So what I'm going to do actually up here is create another div. Oops. And let's give it the ID of feed. So we've got a feed where we want all of this to display. The next thing I'm going to do is grab the feed. So I'm going to use document query selector, or I could use get element by ID. It is totally up to you. And grab the element with the ID of feed, and I'm going to use append child to append the country card. Cool. So now back here, if I refresh this and I click show countries, there we go. We are getting the names of every country showing up in our browser. And you will notice I didn't refresh, the page did not refresh. So this is Ajax at work. Ta-da! You could, of course, do whatever you want with this. So I can also make an image, as we said. I'm just going to continue doing this. Country called image equals document create element image. So we create an image. And the next thing I want to do is grab the country card image source and add the country flag, just like we did with the name. And of course, I'm going to put that in the country card actually. So country card, append child, country card image, and then put the whole thing in the feed. Okay, so let's have a look now. Once again, if I click the button, notice the page will not refresh, and I'm just getting the country's name and image showing up in our browser. Wonderful. So hopefully, I'm just going to zoom out so you can see everything maybe a little bit clearer. Hopefully this all makes sense. There we go. Now, there is actually a newer way to do all of this for us that is a lot simpler, and that is using the JavaScript Fetch API. However, I did think that it was important to cover what the XML HTTP request object is and how to use it in case you ever come across it in the future. So that's Ajax in a nutshell. But why do we care? Well, we will be seeing this word a lot in this mini-series, so it's important to grasp its core concepts before moving on with learning about asynchronous JavaScript. I hope you're ready. The next video in this series is going to be async versus sync JavaScript. I'll see you soon. Hello everyone, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to be talking to you about Ajax. So how it's used, I'm going to be using my usual visual style as well as show you how Twitter uses Ajax to update this little button right here with the count without a browser refresh, followed by some of our own code examples to finish things off. Now, the only prerequisite that I ask of you before starting this video is to have a basic understanding of the fundamentals of JavaScript first. Or if you're feeling adventurous and want to learn what Ajax is anyway, then please do carry on. This video is actually part of a Asynchronous JavaScript mini-series that I am doing, which is free and will always be free. So please do give me that like and that sub, as that is how I can carry on to make hot content for each and every one of you. So please go ahead and do that. And before we get going, a quick word for our video sponsors.